1998, Angola. A war people back home barely wrote about. And in the skies over that war, there were our people. Formerly our people. Pilots from Russia and Ukraine, who just yesterday had served in one army, were now hauling cargo and people for foreign money in someone else's hell. The airplanes came from the same place, too, from a country that no longer existed. That's where we begin. Not with the designer, not with the drawing board, but with one simple fact that hardly anyone believed back then. An airplane can outlive the state that built it. And not just outlive it, but begin a second life. A wild one. No rules, no maintenance, no scheduled spare parts. We're talking about the An-24, affectionately An-26. In cockpits, they called it simpler things, and much rougher ones too. Fantomas, the shaker table, the workhorse. But always like it was one of their own. And this is also about its blood brother, the cargo An-26. You'll see why these two can't be told separately. One stayed behind to keep Siberia fed. The other went off to foreign wars. The aircraft was conceived back in 1958 at the Antonov Design Bureau in Kyiv. The task sounded modest enough. Build a reliable airplane for regional routes to carry people to places where a big airliner had no business going. Its first passenger flight came on October 31, 1962. And here comes the first fact that breaks the usual picture. What mattered most in this airplane wasn't speed, wasn't comfort. It was one single ability: to land where there basically was no airfield at all. On a dirt strip, on a packed earth strip, on a short strip that a normal airplane wouldn't even think about taking off from. It was built for the Soviet Union's own taiga and its own settlements. But that same trait is what later threw An-26 out into the savannah. And now, here's how the country ceased to exist, but the airplanes stayed. 1991. Aeroflot's enormous fleet breaks apart into pieces. Thousands of aircraft are left hanging in the air, both literally and figuratively. And that's when these very An-24s and their cargo brother, the An-26, begin a whole new geography. Ukraine's URGA, a real company, not a legend, would carry people and cargo to places normal operators stayed away from. Peacekeeping missions in Georgia, in Macedonia, flights across Africa and South Asia. Its fleet would include both the An-26 and the passenger An-24. And let me be clear right away, no embellishment. On those African and Asian runs, it was more often the cargo An-26 doing the work, the blood brother of our An-26. Same school, same blood. So when we talk from here on about its wild life, keep this in mind. This is the story of a whole Antonov family, all of it grown from one idea, the idea of simplicity. And that's the whole trick. At that same time, the West was flying aircraft you couldn't just abandon under the African sun, without a hangar, without a maintenance schedule, without clean jet fuel. This one you could. It was designed with structural margin, almost in a military way, on the assumption that it would be repaired not in ideal workshop conditions, but with whatever was available, wherever it happened to be. Cold weather resilience, ruggedness, maintainability, those aren't brochure words. That's what the crews themselves kept repeating for decades. The aircraft was simple and reliable, and it didn't need frequent, complicated maintenance. They took it from the taiga to the desert, and it barely noticed the difference. That simplicity had a price. The cabin was so loud, people had to raise their voices to talk. And it was no fuel miser either, especially by today's standards. But in the 90s, when the choice wasn't, is it comfortable or not, but whether it would fly at all, that kind of ruggedness was forgiven everything. And here comes the question we're really here for, the central question of this whole story. I'm not going to answer it yet. We're going to take the long way there, through lives and through numbers. An airplane that outlived its own country, that carried people through African wars and still, do you hear that? Still carries them over the Siberian taiga, because there is still nothing to replace it. So what is that? A triumph of the machine? Or an indictment of the people who, in half a century, still never managed to build its replacement? For now, just remember this. They were already burying An-24 at the turn of the century, and it's still flying. And do you know where it really began? Not in the design bureau. But on the day the country that ordered this airplane vanished from the map, and the airplane was still sitting on the runway, tanks full, ready for flight. To understand why this airplane outlived the country that built it, we have to rewind, way back, into a world that no longer exists. Kyiv, the late 1950s. At the Antonov Design Bureau, a task lands on the table that sounds almost boring. A regional route airplane is needed. Not a record breaker, not a showpiece for parades, a workhorse. And hidden inside that boring wording was a trap the country would fall into later. But more on that in a bit. So what were they flying out to the hinterland on back then? Piston aircraft, Li-2s and IL-14s. Honest machines, but already hopelessly yesterday's technology. Slow, cramped, expensive to operate. The country was growing. It needed to connect settlements, mining camps, and distant garrisons. But in practical terms, there was nothing to carry people on. And here is the document that started it all, the Council of Ministers Decree of December 18, 1957. Dry bureaucratic lines, but behind them was a decision to renew the country's entire sky in one sweep. The major routes went to the turboprop Il-18, and everything else, that vast capillary network stretching to the smallest district center, was to be taken over by a new Antonov aircraft. Work began in 1958. The first passenger flight came on October 31, 1962. And what followed is what reports would call, with a dull word, replacement. In reality, in barely 10 years, the new airplane became the backbone of regional routes, and the old piston Ils and Lis began to fade out. By the 70s, its routes covered everything: Siberia, the Far East, Central Asia, the Caucasus, the far north. 1/6 of the Earth's landmass. And right away, you get something you would not expect from a simple regional aircraft. It was designed with a military-grade strength reserve, not just so it can fly, but so it can keep flying even when everything is against it. Back then, that looked excessive. No one today would pay for that kind of built-in margin. They'd count every pound. But they built it in anyway. And jumping ahead for a moment, it was exactly that extra metal that would pull this airplane back from oblivion 30 years later. At the time, nobody paid much attention to it. Now, to be fair, without the victory fanfare, the West was doing the same thing at the time. The task was the same across half the world. Replace the aging Douglas DC-3, the airplane regional service had been riding on since the war. Britain built the Hawker Siddeley HS-748. The Netherlands built the Fokker F-27 Friendship. Both were turboprops, both aimed at the same class, both powered by the British Rolls-Royce Dart. And here's what's interesting. The British, like Antonov, deliberately built a tough airplane for short strips in places with barely any airfield at all. The Dutch went another way. They bet on range and passenger comfort. And that contrast with the Dutch airplane matters, because a quiet cabin was never one of our machine's strong points. Passengers would remember that for the next 50 years. The West knew how to make them quieter and smoother. Antonov made his stronger and simpler. Everyone was solving their own problem. And as it turns out, in the lawless 90s, the survivor would not be the quietest or the most comfortable. Now let's talk scale, because there's a difference between a good airplane and an airplane that became the backdrop of an era. More than 1,300 were built in Kiev alone, and even that was not enough. So production was expanded to 2 more cities, Ulan-Ude and Irkutsk. The most numerous version was the An-24B, with about 400 aircraft of that variant alone. More than 200 went abroad to 26 countries, and in China, they ended up building it themselves under license, under the name Xi'an Y-7. Inside were 2 AI-24 turboprops, 2,500 horsepower each. Speed was about 286 miles per hour, with a range of nearly 1,180 miles. Roughly like flying from Moscow to the Urals without landing. Solid numbers, but not record-breaking. And that says everything about its character. This airplane was built not to impress, but to work. For a long time, day after day, reliably. In any frost, from any strip. And then came the strange part. Usually, technology dies with its own era. The era goes away, and its machines go with it. To museums, onto pedestals, into the scrap heap. That's how it has always been. This one went the other way. The era ended, the country disappeared, the factories stopped, but the airplane remained. Thousands of aircraft, scattered from the Baltics to Kamchatka, suddenly belonged to no one and everyone at once. And that is where we step next, into that void between 2 worlds, in 1991. Into the place where people the Antonov Design Bureau could never have imagined would start fighting over these simple, reliable machines. 1992. And something happens that just 5 years earlier, no aviator could have imagined even in a nightmare. The largest airline in human history ceases to exist. It does not collapse financially. It is not declared bankrupt in court. It simply falls apart, like a house of cards that had been held up too long by a single finger. To understand the scale, just one number. By the late 80s, Aeroflot was carrying up to 130 million passengers a year. 130 million. As if, in a single year, you lifted the population of a large country into the air. One company. One for the entire vast union. And in 1992, that giant splinters into more than 300 separate airlines. 300. Some of them have 1 or 2 aircraft in the fleet. Literally, here's your airplane, here's your sign, now you're an airline. From here on, you're on your own. And there was nothing to survive on. passengers got poorer and stopped flying. Traffic fell off a cliff. Money ran out for everyone at once. And in the middle of that collapse sat them, thousands of our little Anushkas. Yesterday, the pride of a unified system. Today, a burden on the books of an outfit that does not even know if it will survive until spring. Of those more than 300 companies, less than half would make it to the early 2000s. The rest would disappear, along with hopes, loans, and people. And this is where the real reason for this whole story begins. An airplane the country had once built with a strength reserved to last decades suddenly became worth pennies. More precisely, it was worth what an airplane is worth, but it was being sold like scrap metal with wings. Because no one wanted to keep feeding machinery they could no longer afford to pay for. And so the airplanes began to flow outward, abroad, into any market that would take them. And the best market turned out to be Africa. The logic was simple, almost familial. Soviet equipment had been going there for decades through friendly regimes. People there knew how to handle it, and nobody asked too many questions. A continent where our airplane was not a curiosity, but an old acquaintance. And if this hidden side interests you, how great machines were sold off for next to nothing and began a second, wild life, stay with us. It only gets hotter from here, in the most literal sense. And to show you just how wild it all became, here's one story, not even about Africa. About how suddenly both the airplane and the man at the controls became almost powerless. The brother of our little Antoshka, the cargo An-26, an aircraft of the Latvian company Latavio, chartered by a British firm. The crew were our people, Gaidash, Klishin, and Timenko, and two Igors, Timmerman and Musk-Vitinkov. December 1995. They are detained in Bombay and end up in an Indian prison for 1,677 days, almost 4.5 years. Sit with that number for a second. 1,677 days for simply doing your job on an airplane that somebody, somewhere, decided to use the wrong way. That was the free market for our airplanes and our crews. No country behind them, no union, no consul within reach. An airplane whose country had been erased from the map, and people that country could no longer protect. Latvia, Britain, India, and we have not even reached the main destination yet. Because the main flow went where it was 104 degrees in the shade, where the runway was rolled clay, where service meant one mechanic and a toolbox, and where spare parts took 6 months to arrive, to a place where our simple, tough airplane fit perfectly, and where people would pay for it. To Africa. That is where we are headed in the next part. Picture an airfield that barely exists. Red packed earth instead of concrete. A sky bleached white by the sun. The air over the runway shimmers so hard that the far end seems to float like a mirage. Somewhere, a dog is barking. Barefoot boys scatter from the propellers. And through that haze, rocking slightly on approach, in it comes. An airplane born for the Siberian deep freeze. Here, on the other side of the world, it turned out to be exactly what was needed. And it took root there like almost nothing else. Why this one? Because that is exactly how it was built. An airplane that did not care whether there was a real airfield or not, one you could repair with a hammer out in the open, one that could land on that same clay, on dirt, on a strip marked out, basically, by eye. What had been a normal survival requirement in the Soviet taiga became salvation in the African savanna. The airplane did not notice that it had changed hemispheres. It did not care whether it was below zero outside or 104 above. It just worked, and people took it. One concrete example, not a legend, but a fact. The Malian Air Force received 3 of our An-24s and a pair of cargo An-26s, and some of them were still flying into the late 2000s on aircraft that were pushing 40 years old by then. 40 years in a climate that kills metal faster than people. That is why it was respected there, not for the beauty of its instrument panel, for the simple fact that it brought people back, again and again. Now let's be honest about the price. Because without that, this would sound like a fairy tale, and we are not telling fairy tales here. Respect was one thing, but these airplanes were flown at the limit, and not always by the crew's choice. The tone was set not by the pilot, but by the one paying the bill. In the chase for profit, operators took worn-out aircraft, loaded them far beyond reason, and treated maintenance requirements with, let's say, a certain carelessness. Overloading became normal. Fatigue weakened structure became normal. If it makes it, that's enough, became normal. And here, the airplane's reliability turned into a cruel joke. The more it forgave, the more they piled onto it. The longer it held together, the less mercy it got. The structural margin designed into it with such care was turned into a free pass for people who simply used that strength up. And the ones who paid were people. After the collapse, our aviators poured into Africa. The country behind them had fallen apart. There was no way to feed their families, so they went where the pay was. In Luanda alone, as many as 40 Russian pilots for a time lived right inside the trade mission building and flew from there, including to neighboring Namibia. Not out of any thirst for adventure, out of desperation. In Angola alone, in the 1990s alone, 17 crews were killed or went missing. 17. That is not some detached statistic. That is 17 times several people, each with a name, a home, somebody waiting for them. They flew airplanes they loved. And those airplanes were honest as they were allowed to be. But even the most faithful airplane cannot cancel out overloading, a worn engine, and an order to fly when flying is not possible. The machine kept hauling until the very end. After that came what no longer depended on the machine. That is the full truth about Africa's love for our airplane. It was respected precisely because it held on where nothing else could. And for that respect, payment was made in the same currency as always in this story: human lives. Have you flown on one? Maybe some of you shook around in that red-hot cabin over the savannah yourselves. Or maybe your father, or the guy next door in the garage, told you how it bucked over the desert and what all of it was hanging on by. Write in. These stories were never written down, and they should be. Because next I want to talk not about geography and not about contracts, but about the people who sat in the cockpit. About the people. And we will start with one specific crew, with 3 names worth saying out loud: Baranek, Starovoitov, Bondaryov. 3 last names, 3 cities: Krasnodar, Taganrog, Kursk. 3 men who on one day did not come home. I promised I would say their names out loud, so I am saying them. Because we have already said a lot about the machines, but machines were not the ones flying them. Valery Petrovich Baranik, captain. Sergei Starovoytov, co-pilot. Ivan Bondaryov, flight engineer. Their aircraft was a cargo An-26, the brother of our little Anpushka. The same Antonov school, the same blood, the same fate. Let's stop on the flight engineer for a moment. That is the profession without which this whole story would not have happened at all. The flight engineer is the person who keeps a 40-year-old machine in the air, the one who knows every one of its ailments, every knock, every leak, the one who becomes that very service when no real service is left. It was men like Bondaryov who held up the entire second, wild life of these airplanes. So how did they end up there, over a foreign continent? We already talked about it. After the collapse, thousands of our aviators were left without a sky and without a paycheck. They went where there was money. Krasnodar, Taganrog, Kursk. Ordinary Russian cities. Ordinary men, professionals, each with a family to support. No romance, just work. It was simply that the work turned up on the other side of the world. October 4th, 2007. Outside Kinshasa. Takeoff. The aircraft lifts off the runway, and at that moment, something happens that must never happen. The propeller separates from the right engine. In mid-air. The airplane loses thrust on one side. It yaws. The crew tries to hold it, but the balance is gone. The aircraft rolls, clips the trees. The impact tears off the right wing. Then comes the dive. After that, the people in the cockpit have only a few seconds left. Later, the cause would be stated dryly. Wear. Wear in the engine and in the aircraft skin of a machine that had been worked too long in a tropical climate. That same heat that wears away metal over decades. In the end, it finished it off. Not all at once, little by little. Until one morning, something came off that had no right to come off. Even the most faithful airplane is honest only up to the point that people take care of it. Beyond that, loyalty ends, and physics begins. But it was not only the 3 men in the cockpit who died. The aircraft fell onto a residential neighborhood, onto homes where people lived who had nothing to do with aviation. In all, 52 people were killed in that crash. 1 survived. The relief flight engineer, a local man, a citizen of the Congo. And this is where the darkest line in the whole story is drawn. The price was paid not only by the people at the controls, it was also paid by the people who simply happened to be down below, under the wing of an old airplane that someone decided to keep flying a little longer than they should have. And behind these 3 names, don't forget, stand others. Those same 17 Angolan crews, and many more whose names we will never know. Baranik, Starovoytov, Bondaryov. These are faces for the statistics, just 3 among many. We know about these 3 only because a record survived. When you say the aircraft was operated to the limit, it sounds technical, almost like bookkeeping. But behind those words are real people in a real cockpit and real homes down below. And still, one question remains, and we have not answered it yet. If this machine ultimately let everyone down in the places where it was pushed too far, why did people still trust it? Why did they climb back into it again and again, trust it with their lives, ask it to carry the impossible? The answer is not in the people. The answer is in the design itself, in what Antonov and his engineers built into it back in that vanished world. And that's what we need to talk about next, what this aircraft had inside it. The main secret of this machine is not the engines, not the speed, and not even the strength, though we will get to that too. The real secret is this: it doesn't need you. It doesn't need an airport. It doesn't need a crowd of ground equipment around it. It knows how to manage on its own. And that quality, not its flight performance, is why neither the collapse, nor Africa, nor 40 years of hard use could kill it. Let me explain the trick. Take any modern airliner. It is, in essence, a fussy infant. For it to do something as basic as start its engines, a ground power unit has to pull up and supply electricity, air, support. No airport service, no flight. It is tied to civilization by an umbilical cord of hoses and cables. Now look at the An-24. On board, it carries its own little engine generator, the TG-16 unit. What does that mean in plain English? It means the aircraft starts itself. It lands on a bare strip in the middle of the tundra where there is no thing. And on its own, with no outside help, it spools up the turbines and flies away. That is the key to its whole second life. In Africa and in Siberia alike, the aircraft was designed not to depend on the ground, which means it could be driven into places where, for all practical purposes, there was no ground infrastructure at all. Where everything else stops working, it still works. Then there is another detail, one ordinary people never notice, but an engineer sees first: where the engines are mounted. On the An-24, they are mounted high, above the wing, far from the ground. Why? Because down below there is mud, snow, puddles, stones from a soaked runway. A low-slung engine will suck all of that in and choke on it. A raised one will not. That is why this aircraft can land where a normal airplane has no business going: on wet surfaces, on snow-covered strips, on unpaved runways. And everything in it follows the same rule: simpler, more reliable, repairable out in the field. The landing gear was completely redesigned in its time for exactly that reason: simplicity and reliability. Cold weather resilience, maintainability. Those were not brochure slogans. They were design decisions. This aircraft was built from the start on the assumption that it would be serviced not in a spotless hangar with a computer, but by a guy in a quilted jacket with a wrench and a few choice words. And over all of that sits that same structural margin, built in, as we already know, almost on a military scale, with extra to spare. Crude? Heavy? Inefficient? Yes, but durable. Now it all comes together into one picture: self-sufficiency, high-mounted engines, simplicity, margin. Taken one by one, those are just engineering choices. Put together, they are a philosophy. This aircraft was built for a country where half the country had no proper airfields, where a runway could mean a direction cleared through the taiga. It was designed from the very beginning so that it would not need civilization. And that is the bitter irony. the civilization that gave birth to it disappeared. But the aircraft, the one that needed no one and nothing, remained. It outlived its country for exactly one reason. It was built to get by without it. Its most backward traits, roughness, simplicity, excess, turned out to be the most durable. Everything luxurious in it would have broken long ago, but the parts of it that came from the logic of a wagon are still flying today. And there is a place on Earth where you can see that right now. Not history, the present. Where winter drops to -50 Celsius, where the only way to the next settlement is by air, where out of 30 airfields, maybe a third have anything you could call a proper runway, where there is still nothing to replace it with, and people are seriously arguing about that right now. This is our north, Siberia and the Russian Far East, the home Antoshka never really left. And that is where we are heading next. -50 Celsius. A settlement you can reach in summer only by helicopter or all-terrain vehicle, and in winter by ice road, if the weather cooperates. No railroad, no proper highway, and the only thread connecting it to the outside world is that packed snow strip out on the edge. And onto that strip, heavily and like it belongs there, it touches down. The same airplane. In Africa, people paid for it with their lives. But here, at home, it saves lives. It brings in a doctor, medicine, mail, someone who needs a hospital. This is not history. This is today. To understand why it still has not been retired, you have to understand what the North really is. Take Yakutia, the biggest and most aviation-dependent territory in the Far East. Around 180 local air routes, and 4 out of 5 survive on subsidies. Otherwise, people simply could not afford to fly. And now the detail everything hinges on. Of the region's 32 airports, only 9 have a proper paved runway. 9 out of 32. Everything else is dirt, snow, or ice. So the question becomes obvious. What are you supposed to fly there? For a modern airliner, a runway like that is a death sentence. It needs concrete, support services, a whole level of infrastructure that does not exist there and is not coming. Antoshka does not need that. We have already seen it. It is its own airfield. It was built for the brutal north, for wind, snow, and deep cold. And it lands on that same compacted snow strip that is barely more than a cleared direction. For people in the north, this is not retro nostalgia. It is the difference between whether the doctor gets there or not. And we are not talking about 1 or 2 surviving museum airframes. These airplanes are in the fleets of active carriers right now. Air Aero, Alrosa, Angara, Krasavia. Real flights, real schedules, real people in the seats. An aircraft designed under Khrushchev is still today, in our own time, flying essential social routes in places where everything would stop without it. One example is Khabarovsk Krai, 14 socially significant routes. Not once upon a time, but operating right now on the An-24 and its cargo sister aircraft. 14 threads whole settlements are hanging from, and all of it runs on aircraft whose contemporaries are living out their final days. Some of you have probably flown routes like that in the north yourselves. To what settlement? On what route? If you have your own story, about an ice-covered boarding stair, a delay because of a blizzard, the smell inside an old 24. Write it in the comments. That is living memory, and no textbook will preserve it. But there is another side to this too, and that is why this chapter is not about nostalgia. It is about anxiety. These airplanes are old, very old, and they will have to be taken out of service sooner or later. In the Far East itself, they are saying openly that if the An-24 is retired in the next 2 or 3 years, regional transportation could face a collapse. Not things will get worse, collapse. Because retiring it is only half the job. The real question is, replaced by what? And at that point, all the pride in this tough, durable airplane suddenly goes sour. For half a century, one country, and then another, used what had once been built with a strength reserve. Used it, ran it, drained the life out of that resource, but never raised a replacement. The airplane turned out to be so good that it could simply be ignored. For half a century, ignored. Convenient? Yes. What that leads to, we will tally up later. So what you get is a strange, almost absurd picture. An aircraft people have been burying for 25 years is still carrying entire regions on its back, simply because there is nothing to replace it. And here comes back the same question we asked in part 1. Is this unbreakable loyalty its triumph? Or is it the price someone else is paying for the fact that no replacement was ever built? I am not going to answer that yet. Too soon. Because this long, drawn-out loyalty to an old airplane comes at a cost. What exactly that cost is, we will see in the next part. And the price, as always in our history, is not measured in money. July 24th, 2025. A routine flight. Khabarovsk, Blagoveshchensk, Tinda. Far East, summer, low cloud over the hills. On board are 48 people, 42 passengers, and 6 crew members. Among the passengers is a 1-year-old child. None of them will make it. I will say it right away, with no suspense. There will be none here. This is not the kind of case for storytelling tricks. Just the facts, in order. Morning. An Angara An-24 is approaching Tinda. The weather is bad. On approach, the crew goes around. A normal procedure, really, when the landing does not work out on the first attempt. Then, at around 7 in the morning Moscow time, contact with the airplane simply breaks off. They will find it later. Burning wreckage on a hillside, about 9 miles from the city. The aircraft struck terrain while on approach to land. There are no survivors. All 48. I am not going to describe the details. They do not belong in a story about machines. I will say only one thing. Behind every one of those 48 lines on the list was a whole life. And it ended that morning over the taiga, 9 miles from home. Now, the causes. And here I have to be careful, because easy answers are the most treacherous ones. The investigation was assigned to the Interstate Aviation Committee. The flight recorders were found, though damaged. The final report will not be released until February 2026. For now, investigators are looking at several scenarios. Crew error in difficult weather conditions, a technical malfunction, or confusion in altitude indications. Notice this. None of the early scenarios says outright, the airplane fell apart from old age. Most likely, this was not a case of a wing coming off. And that matters, because the temptation is obvious. The aircraft is 50 years old, so it must be to blame. But no, that is not how this works. That would be unfair both to the case itself and to the people who died. But there is another question on a completely different level, and it is far more uncomfortable. Not, why did this particular airplane crash that morning? But, why was a 50-year-old aircraft still flying a scheduled passenger flight in 2025 at all? And this is where the whole story comes together in a single point. Because there is nothing to replace it with. We already felt that in the north, and now here are the numbers for the whole country. Out of roughly 150 regional aircraft in Russia, as many as 98 are still the same An-24s and An-26s. Their average age is around half a century. And by some estimates, a quarter of them will be grounded in less than 5 years. And then comes the full closing of the circle, the reason we started in Kiev in the first place. Back to the very beginning, these aircraft were designed at the Antonov Design Bureau in Kiev. And today, to extend their service life, operators need technical bulletins from the original developer, the Ukrainian developer. And access to those bulletins is gone. A major overhaul for a single aircraft runs around 200 million rubles, and even that often makes no economic sense. So this is what happened. The aircraft was once built with an enormous structural margin, so it could serve for a long time. And it did. It served so long that it outlived its country, and even outlived the ability to repair itself properly. Its loyalty, its toughness, turned into a trap. People relied on it so completely that they left themselves no other way out. That is the price. Not a financial one, I warned you. The price is that entire regions depend on aircraft that should have been replaced long ago, but there is nothing to replace them with. And every one of those flights is a compromise between people need to fly and flying on this is getting more dangerous. A compromise that, one day, on July 24th, ended on a hillside near Tenda. And now, for the very last time in this whole story, I'm going to ask the question I've been carrying since part 1. Only now, it no longer sounds abstract. What was this unbreakable loyalty of the An-24 really? A triumph by the engineers who built an almost eternal machine? Or a sentence passed on a country that failed to build its replacement in half a century and is paying for it now? In the next part, I will finally answer as honestly as I can. I promised an answer, so here it is, as plainly as I know how. What was the An-24's unbreakable loyalty? A triumph or a sentence? The answer is both at the same time. And that is not dodging the question. That is the answer. Let me explain why there is no other honest one. First, the triumph. That part is real. A group of engineers in the late 1950s created an aircraft that has been flying for more than 60 years. Not was produced for 60 years. Flying, carrying people, today, right now. An aircraft that lands where nothing else can, starts on its own, can be repaired in the field and does not quit in the cold. They were aiming for a dependable regional airliner and ended up creating something close to permanent. That is outstanding engineering work. No discounts for the era. I take my hat off to them, and I suggest you do the same. If the story ended there, it would be pure, bright pride. But it does not end there, because every medal has a reverse side, and this one is heavy. Russia is, in fact, building a replacement for the An-24. It is called the TVRS-44 Ladoga, a modern 44-seat regional turboprop for exactly the same mission. It was supposed to arrive and finally take the old workhorse off the stage. And this is where it turns into something almost comic, if it were not so sad. Listen to the state of that replacement as of 2026. According to some reports, the project was paused and handed over to the military with the work to be used for Army versions. The manufacturer, UZGA, denies that, saying it has approval for the first flight and that the passenger version will get airborne before the end of the year. We will see who is right. But the fact remains, half a century after the An-24 first took wing, its replacement still has not truly gotten off the ground. For now, it does not exist. Half a century. That is a very long time. Try measuring it against something familiar. In less time than that, humanity flew to the moon and came back more than once. And in all that time, we still could not replace one turboprop aircraft for local routes. And if this matters to you, if you want regional aviation to keep existing at all and not just endless talk about it, support the video, subscribe. It really does help stories like this reach people. That leaves the one uncomfortable thought this whole story was really building toward. Triumph and sentence are not two different conclusions here. They are the same conclusion, seen from opposite sides. The aircraft was made so well that it could be neglected, so reliable that its replacement was postponed year after year, decade after decade. Why bother? It is still flying. Its very excellence became the trap. If the An-24 had been a little worse, a little more temperamental, it would have been retired back in the 1990s, and something new would have replaced it long ago. What doomed it was not weakness. It was reliability. That is the real truth. And it is not a cheerful one. This is not a story about a great airplane, and it is not a story about a broken system. It is a story about how a great airplane allowed the system to do nothing. The engineers' triumph became an indulgence for everyone who came after them. So, was it a triumph or a sentence? A triumph of the designers that became a sentence for the country. One grew directly out of the other. If they had built it worse, there would have been neither so much pride nor so much trouble. And one last quiet question remains. If this airplane really did outlive everyone, its country, its creators, even its own replacement, then what about it now? Where is that An-24 today? And how does all of this end for it? That is in the final part. We will go to where it stands, and maybe we will understand one last thing about it, and about ourselves. Where is our hero now? In some places, on pedestals. In Ufa, Saratov, and Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, they stand raised on concrete supports, their flying days behind them. The one on Sakhalin, for example, served for more than 40 years, first with Aeroflot, then with local operators, and now greets people entering the city from the airport side. It earned that place. And in Perm, one of them was turned into a cafe, just like that. An aircraft that landed on ice and dirt strips, that carried people across half a continent. Now people drink coffee inside it. I do not know what to feel here. Maybe smile and sigh. But I do not want us to end there, but at home, in Yakutia. There, near Yakutsk Airport, an An-24 stands too. And this is not an ad display and not a cafe. It is a memorial. The aircraft was installed in memory of the crash in January 1970, the first An-24 to begin flying in the skies of Yakutia. At night, on approach to Batagai, struck a mountainside near the Adicha River. No one survived. 28 passengers and a crew of 6. 1970. And then 2025 near Tinda. Between them lie half a century and thousands of ordinary, uneventful flights. I am not going to draw a heavy line here and say that everything repeats itself. You have already seen it all for yourself. I will say only this. The home of this aircraft preserves the memory of both what it gave people and what it took from them. Both are true. Stand for a minute beside one of these airplanes on a pedestal. Just look at it. It carried mail and doctors to settlements with no road access. It hauled cargo through African wars. People made it home on it, and on it they did not. It was loved by those who flew on it, and cursed by those who crashed in it. It outlived its country, its designers, its rivals in the sky. And it looks like it may even outlive its own replacement. There it stands, heavy and calm, on a concrete support, silent. And somehow, it turns out that it tells us no less about ourselves than it does about itself. And still, not all of them are on pedestals. Right now, while you are listening to this, somewhere at a remote northern airfield, on a packed snow runway, another one just like it is standing there. Not a monument, alive, with the preheater running, with mail and passengers on board, with full tanks, ready for departure. That same airplane that outlived the country that built it. It never even thought about stopping. It is simply doing its job, where there is no one else to do it. So what was it, really, this stubborn, faithful, uncomfortable airplane? I have already given my answer. Yours is up to you. A monument to our ingenuity, which managed to build an almost eternal machine? Or a monument to our misfortune, to the fact that in half a century, we still never learned how to let go of what should have been let go long ago. Maybe it is both. Maybe it is the very same monument. We are just looking at it from different sides. Think about that. And if this resonated with you, subscribe. There will be more stories like this here, about machines and about people we forget for no good reason. And share this with someone who remembers that sky. That is how it keeps living. And let it keep flying as long as it can.